There we go. Hopefully everything will run smoothly. All right, so last week then I looked at Erin Hansen, our artist, and we looked at a video as well of some of her stuff too, to give us a bit of an idea about how she works and things. And then I reproduced that picture with the cactuses and that. So the idea there was to experiment with how she uses the brushes, also to create a background to then paint over the top of as well. So what I've got today is I also talked last week about Scot Naismith. So I'll just show you my so that's the one we did last week, and I really like the colors and the textures, and we were just having a little chat about her work and how she was a childhood prodigy and everything as well. One of the things I found really inspiring about her practice is the fact that she does she's been doing a painting a week for 10 years, and you can watch a video on this, how she developed her style over that period of time, which I found really quite inspirational. But it was good fun playing around because the colours on her work are absolutely fantastic. I really loved when I copied this, putting in the little turquoise cactuses and the pink cactuses towards the front, as well as doing the mountain range towards the back too. But when I worked on it, you can see how I went back into the picture a number of times, particularly the sky, to make some of those colours more opaque. So it's basically adding a little bit more white to the colour and layering those colours on top of each other, also to show the marks. Now the other thing that we noticed, or I noticed during watching the video on her, is how she doesn't just go straight in with the colour. She does have a background, and the background tends to vary in different areas depending on what she's doing. I just did a sort of yellow ochre Venetian red colour in the background, but she varies it. But the thing that I was going to say is she uses like a darker colour to outline and draw in a lot of the details. In other words, mapping out the space before then applying the colours into the spaces and building those up. So that was a fantastic, I really enjoyed showing, having a go at copying one of her works. And you know, every time you work from another artist, you do kind of learn a little bit of something as well. So it's always worth doing that, and eventually something that you learn from this kind of practice sticks and actually transfers into your own work, and helps develop your own style as well eventually. All right, so now Scot Naismith, and I showed you this picture last week, which me and Govinda were just having a little chat about. And Scot Naismith calls his style atmospheric abstraction. That's the one. Atmospheric abstraction. And it's extremely atmospheric, I think, his work. I'm just trying to get everything out of the way here, so I can just select this picture. There we go. Just take it up to the top. So one of the things that I find really good about his work and is the atmosphere, and the way he uses this kind of highlighted lake in the background to draw the eye. But then at the foreground, the initial interest is with the patches of different colours in the foreground, and the little bit of light, green light on the hill there. So, and again, we're talking about layering, we're talking about experimenting with different mark making techniques as well. And of course, you can add texture into that too, using some of the techniques that we've learned over the period of this course. Okay, so there's another one that I've got here. If I can bring it up, let's just get rid of that one. There we go. So this one over here is the one that I'm going to be working from today. So I kind of changed my choice of paintings. I was going to do the one that you just saw, but I really liked the fact that you've got this. I think it's for trains actually. It could have been a viaduct, but I think it's a train line. It's Glenfinnan or something. viaduct. So you've got this wonderful perspective and nice shadows that are that are appearing on all of the foliage and things on the floor. So you've got that initial kind of detail and interest and perspective that leads you all the way into the back where those highlights are on the lakes again. So this common feature that you see in Scottish landscapes. So what I'm going to be doing actually is I'm going to work on, I'm going to copy this picture, but I'm going to experiment once more by not creating a background, but I'm going to work on some brown paper that I got through the post when I ordered some paper. So I'm going to paint on some found materials today. So but before I show you that, I did find a little video of Scott's work, Scot Naismith's work, and hopefully it will play nicely on here and we'll be able to watch it. So here it is. He's really big on his dramatic, cool films. So let's have a look, see if it plays. Just gonna get the window. There we go. It might be a bit slow.
I see the purpose of the artist is to make others see the world differently, to question what we perceive the world to be. I call my work atmospheric abstractions. They're inspired by the rugged coastline of Scotland, but more specifically they abstract the atmosphere as we see it. And they acknowledge that all around us is made up of the same building blocks, the same molecules. They're just held together differently, be it solid, liquid, or gas. I like to blur the lines between what we perceive as each of these three states. Part of the application of the paint refers to this as well. The drips, the soft transitions between softer shapes and the large areas of thick applied paint with a palette knife, all referring to these three states. Our perception of colour is very limited. Each of our perception of colour may be very, very different. Colour in itself is a figment of the human's imagination, but the reality is there's so many different wavelengths that we can't even perceive. We only see the visible spectrum. The world is made up of sounds we can't hear, light we can't see. And all of this I see as being explained within physics. I see physics, and more specifically particle physics, as a look into the world and a perception of a different world, a world that we don't normally perceive. You can read more about my concepts of my paintings in my new book, Scottish Skies. It's published by Northern Arts Publications.
There we go. Thank you. Right. Okay. So let's go over to my desk. So a really fantastic little video there on Scot Naismith and his work and his ideas as well. One thing that I take away from that particularly is that it's about getting you to or the viewer of the painting to look at the world in a different way, and he certainly does that, doesn't he, through his work and the atmosphere that he creates in his pictures. Okay, so that was the one we did last week, and on this one from Erin Hansen, I first of all painted in a background. What I'm going to do straight away though with this one is I'm going to be working on some brown paper like this today. So this is just quite thick paper that came with some paper that I ordered. So I ordered a big block of paper and I got loads of this stuff with it. And I thought it'd be a nice sort of neutral background to work over the top. As you saw in Scott's work, what he does is he paints the surface quite very loosely to begin with, before then applying the details, the mark makings with his palette knife and everything on top. I'm going to go at it in my own sort of way, I think, with the acrylic paints. So I'm going to draw out the whole thing, and then I'm probably going to use flat brushes. I might bring in a little bit of a palette knife just to explore that idea that he talked about in his work as well. Okay, so what I've done here is I've just printed off the picture and I've folded it into 4 so that I can draw out reasonably accurately the whole of the landscape. And then I'm going to start by mixing a few colours just to get me started on a certain area. So I may start with the viaduct sort of thing down here, and then work into some of these areas underneath, just and see how it goes, because obviously we're all learning from different artworks here. So the experiment is really playing around with the different mark making and the extraordinary and beautiful bright colours in here, and then trying out working on different surface, a found material surface as well. Okay, so it's something that you can try out yourself if you find these materials. I seem to be finding quite a few of these things at the moment. When I've ordered things, I get all these different sorts of materials, so I tend to save them in a big bag full of bits and bobs as well. So we're gonna crack on. I'm going to crack on with that one during this lesson.
Okie dokie. So here we go. So you can see the reproduction on the table. You can see the brown paper, of course, that I've used. It's got a bit of a fold in it, but in the end, that doesn't matter too much. Once you start putting the paint and things on, it kind of disappears. I did actually think about ironing the paper, but it didn't matter in the end. And I never really got around to doing that. So I've used a kind of a grid again. So I folded as you can see from the image here, I folded my painting from Scot Naismith into 4 equal parts, and then drew the same grid at the top, just to enable me to place things quite quickly and effectively into the picture frame that you can see on the brown paper just here. So the nice thing about this painting, as I may have said just before, is that you've got this lovely leading line, which is the viaduct. It comes from the foreground where you've got all this bright colour, all the way through into the background where you've got that lovely white highlight there up on the top right corner or middle right corner. So I started off, I thought I'd get in the structure of the overall viaduct in as quickly as possible, because really that's a focal point for the picture to begin with. Obviously, as I said, it leads you into the picture later on. It's a bit darker as well. It's very distinctive shape. I've got lots of shapes in the painting from Scot Naismith that are indistinct in a way that, well, there are lots of patches of lovely vivid and bright colour, as you can see from this close-up just here. But the structure of the viaduct is certainly a good place to start. So I'm starting here with some primary blue and a little bit of black and some white to add some of the highlights in there as well. I do layer some different colours over the top of this as we progress down the viaduct. It starts to get a bit more pinky and things, so it kind of softens out, I guess, and adds a bit more atmosphere to the picture, as we've got these lovely pinks on the viaduct as well, and these blues and darker colours in the foreground just there too. On the top of the viaduct you can also see the railway or the line across the top, so that's been highlighted to be, particularly towards the back, with some pinks, but there are some various highlights and tones in there as well. And then pretty soon I start to work on the lower part of the picture, the foreground. Now on here, and indeed in some Scot Naismith's videos, you can see how he works, and he does actually apply a wash of colour over the whole of the surface of his pictures before he starts. I just went for a slightly different approach here because I like the brown paper and I wanted some of that brown paper to show through the work that I'm doing here. So I started literally to patch in the colours, or do a patchwork of colours that I then layered on top, and this ended up being quite a long process, but as I said, I wanted some of that brown paper to come through, so I just used that as a sort of starting point there. And you can see me patching in the colours already on this picture just here, and I've also put in the shadows, which adds quite a, adds to that sense of light coming through the archways from the background in this picture. One of the interesting things about Scot Naismith as well, one of the things I've seen him do on some of his videos anyway, is he has one of those drones that he takes up into the sky, and he takes these wonderful shots up there in Scotland that he then uses as part of composition for a painting, or indeed the composition for a painting. Sometimes he'll work straight from imagination, I think, but in this case it looks like he's worked from a real location, and then applied his way of seeing the world to the composition, to the landscape. So his aim really is to get us to look at the landscape through different eyes and to see it in a different way, which is the same with Erin Hansen, who we looked at last week as well. Erin Hansen uses these lovely bright vivid colours and lots of mark making. They're absolutely stunning pieces of work, just like these. Erin Hansen tends to put in a lot more kind of lines and textures, very much like Van Gogh, I suppose, whereas these are contemporary brush strokes and colours that he's applying using his own tried and tested, I guess, colour palette. So you can see me still patching in the colours. You can see me, I'm also layering quite a lot of different colours on top of the river there in the foreground. So during this whole process I found that my colours were quite weren't as bright as Scot Naismith's, but once you've worked into the picture for quite a while, you start to then recognize that there are certain highlights that you can add to really make it come out very vivid, just like in the original. On the screen here, the colors are on the screen picture we've got of this painting just up there, look. The colors are particularly vivid. Now what I did here is I actually printed off a picture on my printer of this painting to work from. I like to have it in my hands while I'm working, but you do have to be aware, if you're printing, the colors aren't always going to be true to the actual artwork. So the printout that I made was much paler than the original painting. So that's something I had to bear in mind whilst I was working. So the colours are building up quite nicely now. I was a bit worried the mark making isn't as accurate perhaps, or the brush strokes aren't as accurate obviously as the real painting are, because of the scale. Scot Naismith works on a much larger scale than this. So, and I was worried about how it would look in the end, but there's a lot of detail in the foreground which actually leads you, just like the viaduct does, towards the background. So you've got this point of interest in the foreground that takes you way back into the painting. So in the end, the marks and the paint that I used towards the background balanced out really nicely with the rest of the picture. You see, I was already tempted by the midground just behind the viaduct there with the green, which I don't do until the second day. There we go. There we are. So we're back at the next day. I forgot to record the first part of what I was doing here, but I talked to a student or two about the fact that Scot Naismith would very loosely apply colour to the base of the canvas first in different areas. So I'm doing that here, perhaps not even as loosely as he does, but applying some colour as a base to work back over. And I did realise, and I probably knew this before I started painting, that this would be a much quicker way of working. So in order for people to be able to see the painting while I'm working, I just flipped it upside down so you can see me from the top working down across the picture. So one area that attracts and is very important, of course, is this highlight or atmospheric perspective just behind the purple mountain on the right hand side. So I've started there applying some white to get that in there straight away, because I wanted to add some more colours back on the top, as in the real painting by Scott. A lot of white here. I do quite a few layers of paint on top of this blue area at the top. And you know, I started to get into a nice old flow with working here. Now the thing to remember at the back is there's not as much detail in that there aren't distinctive marks in just the same way as in the foreground, and the colours are more muted, toned down and pale towards the back. So I'm changing how I use the mixing of the colours. So I might apply the pure colour on and then add white to it as I go, so that we get this real difference between the foreground and the background. And actually having pale colours towards the back, apart from the colour, I also blend those colours a little bit more as well and layer on watered down colour over the top of the bits that I put on previously. So you see it's starting to appear now. I did quite well, I think, to get this whole painting done in the time that I had, so I'm quite pleased with that. So the mountains towards the background there, I've looked carefully at the colours that are on those mountains, and then applied them. But what I'll do a little bit later when that area is dry is I use a glaze of white and greys back over the top of those to really make them look like they're further away. In other words, to put more air between the foreground and the background. So the air, well, by air I mean this atmospheric perspective that I've talked about, which is to make it more pale, and just to get this idea that there's a lot of space between us, the viewer, and the very background, to create that illusion of space in there. And you'll see me do that in a little bit. So here on the mountain on the right hand side, I'm just really just putting down continuously, looking at the original and just applying some of these lovely colours over the top of the mountain, building up lots of layers of texture. So here I go now with this glaze of, or thin wash if you like, of the white. So you can see how that's made it much paler. Now I'm just working into some of the finer detail back over the top of that, just so you can see the ridges of the different mountains in question. Add a little bit of colour in there, some highlights just on the edge. So now it really does start to look like it's going away from us. And here we were just talking about that technique in the class as well. So I've got about half an hour left on this painting in class. So what I'm going to do probably now is work on the mid-ground. That's the red and the green area in the centre. It's interesting to note as well that the reds, or the warm colours here, are opposite to the greens, which gives it that contemporary feel as well, the boldness and brightness of those colours. And I do work back over all of that shortly with some of the purples. Some of the colours that I really loved in this were the actually the purpley colours next to these sort of yellowy greens, limey greens if you like. I really enjoyed those colours. It's so yummy and harmonious. It just makes you want to, you know, grab them and put more of them on and things. So we're just darkening now around different areas, putting in some details and trees. I do hop back to the sky occasionally when I notice things. I particularly notice details that need changing, and that when I look on the screen at myself, at my work progressing there. So you think, oh yeah, that needs to be, that's too bright, or that's not bright enough, and so on. And looking at your painting in a small scale really does help to sort of give you an idea, and that's why you see artists standing away from their work quite often and looking at it and contemplating and deciding what to do next. So they're not just posing. So you can see me just adding in a few more details. So I'm kind of rushing a little bit now because I want to get it finished for the class by the end of the lesson. I know the video is speeded up, but I am working quite quickly. So yeah, so now you've got that sense of perspective, and putting in some of those mid-ground details like the little trees by the river and so forth really helps you to get a sense of what we're looking at here, and it actually joins these two areas together. That's the area that isn't so busy and the area that's softer at the back of the foreground.